Welcome to the College Park Church of Christ Sermon Series podcast. This sermon was recorded at the College Park Church of Christ in the Conroe Porter area. Join us for worship on Sundays at 10:30 a.m. and Wednesday at 7 p.m. Thanks for studying the Word of God with us. Good evening. It's certainly good to be here tonight and good to be able to continue our study from creation to Christ as we take a look at some of the main events that have occurred from creation until the death and burial and resurrection of Christ. And we've talked about creation and the fall, the flood, Sodom and Gomorrah, Isaac, Jacob, and Esau, Joseph, Exodus, Mount Sinai. And Sunday we talked about Jericho. And today I'm going to continue talking about Saul, David, and Solomon, our three kings in the united time of the children of Israel. And that period of time is about 120 years. But putting it into context, as we said, we left off on Sunday talking about the Battle of Jericho. And at that time, Joshua was their leader. And about 25 years after that battle, Joshua is going to die, and this is going to put the children of Israel into a new period, the time that we call the period of Judges. This was a time of, we'll call civil unrest for the children of Israel. They fell into this cycle of sin, of disobedience, turning away from God. They would generally be oppressed by people from foreign peoples. Sometimes even different tribes were oppressed by different groups, and there was even infighting amongst the tribes. But then Israel would cry out, and God would raise up a judge for them, and then they would be delivered by that judge. And that's stories like Samson and Gideon and Deborah. Beginning through that time period, there was Samuel at the end of it, and he was one of the last judge, and he was also a prophet. He's even called a priest at one point. And he had achieved a lot of peace. He had kind of turned the people back to God. He had even achieved a period of peace with the Philistines, who we know had been a very big struggle with them, those people for a long time, off and on. So he had achieved a sort of peace in that time, but he was old now. And he was going to appoint his sons as judges, but the Bible tells us that they were dishonest people, that they took bribes, and they were not the kind of men that needed to be judges. So 1 Samuel 8, verse 4 says, "Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, 'Look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now, make us a king to judge us like all nations.'" So they wanted a king. They wanted to be like other nations. And you think about the time period that they're coming from with lots and lots of wars and lots of civil unrest. So they were probably thinking, we need us a big, strong general to lead us into battle, to unify us. And I think that's the mindset they had, that they were thinking about those wars and the people like that and the countries that they battled, the people that they battled, and saw those powerful kings leading them. And they wanted something like that. So 1 Samuel 8, verse 7, Samuel goes and talks to God, essentially, and God talks to him and says, "And the Lord said to Samuel, heed the voice of the people in all that they say to you. For they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them." And he says, "Since I took them out of Egypt, they've been turning against me, and they've been sinning, and they've been going back and forth." He kind of even says to Samuel, if you read into it a little bit, he almost says to him, "Now you kind of know how it feels," is the impression I got when he's reading through that. But he says, it's really me, so don't take it personal. And he said, but we're going to listen to them. We're going to do what they want, but you give them this warning. And basically said to them, if you have a king, he's going to take your sons and put them on chariots and make them captains. He's going to take your daughters and make them perfumers and bakers and cooks. He's going to take your servants and your fields and your olive groves and your crops and your flocks. And all these things, he's going to tax you, and he's going to put you to war and use all these things for war. And it's going to be very, very difficult. But of course, what did they say? No, but we will have a king over us, again, that we may also be like all the other nations. Because they wanted to be like those nations. And they had this picture and this image in their head. So they're going to have a king. And we're going to see in 1 Samuel 9 that Saul from Benjamin is chosen, from the tribe of Benjamin. The Bible tells us that he is tall and he is handsome. In fact, it literally says that he is basically head and shoulders taller than everybody else. And that's probably where that idea and that phrase even comes from. So I imagine he is the stature and the look that the people were imagining. Tall, strong, handsome, this prototypical looking king in general. Someone who's going to come in and save the people. And at first, the Bible also does tell us it did seem like that he was a humble man, that he did start off with a good heart. But Saul one day is out with a servant. He's looking for his father's donkeys. And the servant says, "Oh, we know where they are. Let's go visit the seer." And apparently that was a pretty common thing, the way they said that. So let's go visit the seer. So they go to see Samuel. And Samuel immediately says and knows, because God told him, he sees this man and he knows who he is. So privately he talks to Saul and he anoints him. But then in front of some other people in verse 24, "And Samuel said to all the people, 'Do you see him whom the Lord has chosen? That there is no one like him among all the people.' So all the people shouted and said, 'Long live the king.'" And really when he says there's no one like him, he had just been kind of describing his physical stature to the people and talking about him, saying, "Look at him, he's tall, he's handsome." So really that's what he was talking about. He wasn't necessarily talking about, I think, his heart and some of the other things that we think about and know that God really appreciated. But the people are excited. They say, "Long live the king." So we see Saul, he goes into it. He has many military victories, and he's successful there. And we see 1 Samuel 11 through 14, he battles the Philistines, the Ammonites, and Moab, and a lot of others, has a lot of victories, and he is that king initially that I think the people were thinking of and were thinking about as he led them to victories. But then we start to see Saul make some mistakes, and we start to see some of his true colors come out, and maybe he was getting arrogant in some of the things that he was doing. But in chapter 13, it's how Saul is impatient, and there's a situation where he's waiting for some instructions from Samuel, which literally from God, through Samuel to him. And Samuel says, wait a couple days and I'll be there. But he gets impatient, and he goes, well, let's do this burnt offering. Let's go ahead and sacrifice to God, and we'll just talk to God now. And of course, Samuel doesn't like that, and God doesn't like that. And Samuel said to Saul, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now the Lord has established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought for himself a man after his own heart. So here he's basically saying, he's not saying I'm going to rip the kingdom from you right this day, but he's saying it's not, I think he's saying your bloodline's not continue. It's not going to continue. We're going to start looking for another king. So we see this first moment here where Saul starts to make some mistakes and he becomes impatient and they're displeased with him. From now on, the way I'm going to kind of set this up, if you see, I've got the chapter that we're talking about over there, and then I've got some points and verses and stuff as we line it up. We get to a situation now where God tells Saul, you got to go and utterly destroy the Amalekites. I want you to wipe them out, kill the king, kill the men, kill the women, kill the animals. Don't take any spoils. Okay, it's pretty clear the way he lays it out for him. But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep, the oxen, the fatlings, the lamb, and all that was good. And Samuel's mad at him. He talks to him, and he says, well, the people, my captains, they wanted some spoil, so I really wanted them to have that, wanted to keep those guys happy. And he said, besides, I did obey you. I just saved this stuff so that we could make some offerings to God. But that is not what he was told to do. He was, again, choosing a different path than what God had laid out for him. Verse 19 says, why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? Why did you swoop down on the spoil and do evil in the sight of the Lord? But Saul's justifying these things in his mind, though, thinking about the way he's doing it. Verse 22 says, because you've rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. So this is, to me, even a little harsher now. And I think now he's saying, okay, you're done. We're starting the pathway. You're going to be out of here. So, and I think Saul now realizes that. He's thinking more immediate now than the future. So we're going to see a shift in Saul as we move forward here. So God sends Samuel to find and anoint a new king and to find somebody. And he basically goes to Jesse. This man, he's got a farm, and he has a bunch of sons, and he looks around, he sees all the sons, they kind of trot him out. He says, one of them's not here. And he says, well, we got this one guy who's over here tending the sheep. So he brings him out, and that's David. And verse 7 says, for the Lord does not see as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So they're looking for a different kind of king now, and they're looking at the heart. And verse 13 says, then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So we see things shift here. It says the Spirit of the Lord came upon David. As Samuel, a lot of names here. I may mix them up a few times. As Samuel sees David, knows who he is, and anoints him in front of all them and the brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord is upon him now from that day. So that's going to be more of a shift, too, with Saul now, as we're going to see him start to take a little bit of a darker turn. He becomes troubled. It's kind of a nice way of saying that. He has these fits, it seems like, of anger, of almost, distress, maybe even a little bit of madness somehow mixed in, and we see his decline begin, and he starts to spiral down. But he becomes troubled. In verse 14 says, but the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a distressing spirit from the Lord troubled him. And that's worrisome because this is also the king. So the things he does, the decisions he makes, has a big impact on the people. And verse 21 says, so David came to Saul and stood before him, and he loved him greatly and became his armor bearer, because one of the servants had said to Saul, hey, you need somebody to come and play harp for you, something to soothe you. And they all said, hey, David, he's a great warrior, he's handsome, he's a great harpist. So they bring David in. Then Saul sent to Jesse saying, please let David stand before me, for he has found favor in my sight. And so it was whenever the Spirit from God was upon Saul that David would take a harp and play it with his hand. Then Saul would become refreshed and well, and the distressing spirit would depart from him. So Saul and David now are starting to develop this relationship, and David's kind of becoming important in a way in Saul's life. Now we get to the situation you've heard of, David and Goliath. If you remember this situation, Goliath is the giant. He's 9.5 feet tall, basically. Remember, he's got somebody going before him just carrying a shield. He's got this giant spear, and it talks about how heavy the spearhead is and the armor that he wears, and he's just this crazy, impressive man. And if you know, the Philistines are standing on one side of the valley, and the Israelites are over here, and every day for 40 days and 40 nights, Goliath goes down there, and he challenges them, and he says to them, you need to come down here, and whoever fights me, whoever wins, basically the others will become servants of them. And of course, Saul and them are scared. They don't want to face this man. They're not thinking about the situation with the right heart. They're just seeing this giant, and they're scared of him. Verse 37 says, though, moreover, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. Because David comes up and he looks around. He says, we can do this. What are you guys scared of? We got God on our side, and God has helped me in the past. He helped me defeat this lion. He helped me defeat this bear. I'm going to do this now. And he even says to Goliath, this day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. So he had complete confidence, knowing that the battle was God's, not his. It wasn't David versus Goliath. He knew that it was God versus Goliath. So if you remember the story, he picks up the 5 stones and the sling, and he runs, and he shoots one, it hits him in the head, and he collapses, and then David takes his sword, cuts off his head, and takes the head. So we see David defeat Goliath. And of course, this news is going to go out, and a lot of people are going to hear about it, and they're going to end up giving praise to David, which of course is going to upset Saul as well. But Jonathan and David now begin to form a bond, and Jonathan is Saul's son. They form this bond, and the Bible even describes them as loving each other, as having one soul, and being very supportive of each other. And David now stays with Saul permanently. Basically, Saul doesn't allow him to leave in a sense. And David becomes one of his military leaders, and he's doing a lot for now in the kingdom. So we see Saul. Thank you. I appreciate that. Saul is becoming more and more jealous of David. We talked about after Goliath, there's even people in the streets shouting, oh, Saul kills his thousands, but David killed his tens of thousands. So Saul's becoming jealous. We know that he gets distressed in his spirit as well. In verse 9 it says, so Saul eyed David from that day forward. And I just can't help but picture him, in the room kind of giving him the side eye, just watching him, thinking about how he's going to bring him down. And that's kind of what we start to see when he has these troubled moments. Because verse 11 says, and Saul cast the spear, for he said, I will pin David to the wall. And David escaped his presence twice. So now he's straight up trying to kill David. He's having these moments, and he's throwing the spear, and David's, heading out and getting away. And this is going to kind of start this cycle that's going to just increase, and we're going to see David have to flee eventually. But Jonathan is kind of a go-between. He tries to make peace between David and Saul, and it's really kind of junior high-ish. I mean, he literally says, I'll go talk to Dad. I'll tell him some good things about you. Whatever he says, I'll run back and I'll tell you. And they kind of play this little game, and it does work. And in a sense, Saul settles down, and he says, so Saul heeded the voice of Jonathan, and Saul swore, as the Lord lives, he shall not be killed. But we're going to see this kind of cycle go with Saul as he says these kind of things, and then he immediately changes his mind and goes later. But David goes on and has a skirmish with the Philistines, and they flee, and that just builds up his reputation even more. So, of course, because of that, Saul tries to kill David again with the spear. He escapes. Then he even goes to his house to try to kill him. And at this point now, David has married Michal, who is Saul's daughter, and they're married. Saul sends these men to the house, and they're trying to get him, and she says, well, he's sick. And then they run into the bed, and she has laid in something in the bed and put a wig of goat fur on top of this kind of fake head and covered it up, just like you see in old movies and comedies. And I wonder if this is the very first time that idea was ever put into a story. But it's kind of neat, and of course they see that it's not David, and David escapes again. She had helped him escape down a window, actually, so that he could get away. So we see this situation that David finds himself in now, where he's just basically on the run from Saul. But Jonathan and David, talking again, they kind of make another covenant here, and David says, whatever you want, I will do it for you. And Jonathan basically says, I just want you to look after my family even down the road. When if we're out of the kingdom, whatever it may be, my father's not king anymore, just look out for my family down the road. It's basically what he tells them. Care for them. Just remember them. So, of course, now Saul is angry, accuses Jonathan of betraying him, throws a spear at Jonathan. He gets away. But David now is really on the run. He flees to the priest Ahimelech, and then he flees to the city of Gad, just trying to get away, and Saul is pursuing him. But 400 loyal men meet up with David, and they're men loyal to David. They're also men that were fed up with Saul. It says they come together. So he's kind of got this small following, almost a small army now of men with him as he's on the run. But Saul's coming after him. He's very, very angry. He shows up back where he met the priest Ahimelech, and Saul and his men kill 85 priests, and then he has the men kill all the people surrounding there in the little village. So they basically wipe all these people out. So we start to see Saul's anger and resentment and jealousy truly get the best of him. As I said earlier, it's dangerous when you have a king making these decisions and he just starts killing people kind of haphazardly because he's so angry. Let's move it ahead. We're in verse 23 and 24 now. David obviously is continuing to flee from Saul. Verse 14 says, David stayed in strongholds in the wilderness and remained in the mountains in the wilderness of Ziph. Saul sought him every day, but God did not deliver him into his hand. So he's on the run. Saul's chasing him. And this is the point where they're kind of in a cave, and Saul goes in there to tend to his needs, I believe is the way it puts it. And David sneaks up and could kill him, but he just cuts a little piece of his robe off, carries it out, sneaks away. And later he confronts Saul and says, look, I could have killed you. I cut this off your robe. I was that close to you. He says, I have no evil in my heart towards you. I've never done anything to you but help you. And of course, Saul says, and now I know indeed that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Therefore swear now to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants after me, and that you will not destroy my name from my father's house. So Saul realizes and just admits, basically, he sees his fate coming, that David's going to be king. So it seems like they might have a little bit of a peace here. But, of course, that's not going to last as we see things move forward. David is still on the run. He's been winning battles. He's now hiding with the Philistines, of all people. But they've taken him in there. And the Philistines gather against Saul now. And Saul sees them, and he's getting afraid. He says, okay, well, now the Philistines are coming against me. David is with them, and he's terrified. And he goes to seek the Lord out for consultation, and the Lord doesn't answer him. So he says, okay, what am I going to do? And this is where he goes to visit the witch of Endor. And, he's outlawed witchcraft and seers and all this stuff at the time. And he goes to her, and she says, whoa, you're going to kill me. He says, no, I'm not. I just want you to help me. So she actually calls up Samuel. The spirit of Samuel appears, and Saul pleads with the spirit for help. And what does he say? Samuel says, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. Well, he's dead. So basically he's telling him, your time on this earth is over. The Lord will also deliver the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines. So we're starting to see the demise of Saul here in the big transition as he pulled up Samuel and he gives him this bit of information. So the Philistines now, they're about to go to war. They send David away because they're like, wait a minute. The lords of the Philistines, as they call them, come in and they say, I know you like him, but he could betray us. In what better way to win back the love of his people by cutting off a bunch of our heads and taking them back and showing us off? So they send him away now. And now while David was gone, he comes back home, essentially to this little village area they were staying in. And the Amalekites have destroyed everyone there, taken the wives, taken their friends captive. So David says, what am I going to do? He goes and actually consults with God, and God tells him, no, go after him. You will go. Take them back, and you will not fail. So he does. He goes, he destroys the Amalekites, and he rescues his two wives. So now the Philistines and Israel fight, as we saw, and we knew that was coming. Israel flees. At this point, though, Saul's 3 sons are killed, and then we're going to see that archers severely wound Saul. So they're fleeing from the Philistines. The sons are dead. The archers are severely wounded. And he basically tells his armor bearer, can you please kill me? I don't want to be captured and tortured and the things that they're going to do to me. But he says, the armor bearer says, I can't kill the king. So it says that Saul then pushed a sword into his belly and killed himself. Verse 6 says, so Saul, his 3 sons, his armor bearer, and all his men died together that same day. So now we've seen the demise of Saul. So now we've seen kind of a split kingdom. Ishabeth he becomes the king of Israel, takes that part. But then Rechab and Baanah, who were, I believe, Jonathan's men, they go and kill Ishabeth while he's sleeping in his bed, taking a nap. He's the king over this part of Israel. They bring the head to David, thinking, hey, we're going to win over David's favor. And David doesn't like that because he's an honorable man. And it says they brought the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron and said to the king, here's the head of Ishbosheth, son of Saul, your enemy who sought your life. Today the Lord has granted vengeance to my lord the king against Saul and his offspring. But David says, how much more when wicked men kill a righteous man in his own house and on his own bed, shall I not now require his blood from your hands and remove you from the earth? And he has them both killed. And that's kind of the attitude he is a lot about these things, with these situations. He's very, I guess, in a sense, honorable about the things that he does and the way that he does things. So David kind of continues to establish things and build things. He brings the ark now of God to the city. And a lot of people gather around. In verse 17 says, so they brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place in the midst of the tabernacle that David had erected for it. Then David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord, and everyone comes, and they witness that, and the fathers of the different tribes are there, and that's a big deal. And David makes a covenant with God in a sense. And verse 26, he says, so let your name be magnified forever, saying the Lord of hosts is the God over Israel, and let the house of your servant David be established before you. For you, O Lord of hosts, God of Israel, have revealed this to your servant, saying, I will build you a house. Therefore your servant has found it in his heart to pray this prayer to you. So he's basically, they make this covenant that your lineage will continue. And we know that David's lineage continues all the way to Christ, and Christ is often called the Son of David. So David continues, has many military conquests. Verse 1 here says, now David says, there's still anyone who is left of the house of Saul that I might show him kindness of Jonathan's sake. Because if you remember, he made that agreement with Jonathan that he would continue to care for his family down the road. So they find Mephibosheth, who is Jonathan's son, when he was 5 years old. He was fleeing, him and one of the maid servants, I believe, were fleeing from a war situation, and he falls and hurts both his feet. So Mephibosheth is injured now, and he's unable to walk as an adult. But David finds him, and he's very kind to him. So David said to him, do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan, your father's sake, and restore to you all the land of Saul, your grandfather, and you shall eat bread at my table continually. He was a very compassionate man. He was a man very true to his word, and he looked after them and gave them that land back, and then he did open his table to him at any given time that he could be with them and spend time with them. And it says that they did. Now, David takes a little bit of a turn, and we know the story of David and Bathsheba. Well, he's out walking on the roof, and he sees her sunbathing or bathing out there, and he finds her very attractive. A man who could have pretty much anything he wanted as king, but he sees her. Verse 4, it says, then David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her, for she was cleansed from her impurity. And she returned to her house, and the woman conceived. So she sent and told David, said, I am with child. So David commits this bad sin, adultery, gets her pregnant, bad situation. Then we have the situation with her husband now. Instead of going and immediately trying to rectify the situation, David has this idea that he's going to try to set Uriah up. He's going to bring him home from war and say, hey, you need to go spend some time with your wife. You know, you guys can hang out together. That doesn't work. Uriah says, no, my men aren't getting to do that, so I'm just going to stay out here. And then he gets him drunk and tries again. He still says, no, my men aren't getting to do anything like that, so I'm not going to do anything like that. So eventually he writes Joab, his general, a letter, and he sends Uriah out to basically the hottest battle zone in the front lines and has him killed. So we see two horrific things he does here. Commits adultery, gets her pregnant, then has her husband killed. Now, one thing I will notice and will say about David is throughout all this, even when he commits sin, he never turns away from doing God's will, in a sense of he never turns away from God. He never turns to other idols. He never leads the people astray. He always immediately goes back and tries to correct what he is doing and stay within the course of God, which is not quite the same we'll see with Saul, and we'll see with Solomon as well. Verse 26 says, when the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she mourned for her husband, and when her mourning was over, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife, and bore him a son. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. So David has displeased the Lord. He goes, confesses to Nathan, after Nathan the prophet kind of tells him this story, and he realizes, oh, you're talking about me, but he confesses and says, I've done wrong in the eyes of the Lord. I've displeased the Lord. And verse 10 says, now therefore the sword shall never depart from your house, because you have despised me, and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. And he's basically saying, your kingdom, your kingship, your time as a king is going to be just continued fraught with military and with war and with bloodshed. And then we're going to see that son that they had together dies. But not too long after that, as long as it takes anyway, Solomon is born. So they have Solomon now, David and Bathsheba, and we know that the lineage is going to fall to him sometime soon. So we got some rebellions that pop up here towards the end, a little later in David's life, and one of them is Absalom's rebellion. We're just going to touch on briefly. But David's son, this is kind of where this started off. Some bad feelings occur because David's son Amnon rapes his half-sister Tamar. Tamar's brother Absalom, who is Amnon's half-brother, is enraged and eventually is going to have Amnon killed. This actually takes place over a period of several years that this has to occur. I think during this time, Absalom just grows angry and bitter and grows and is angry with his father, I think, because David doesn't really necessarily do anything about the situation. And Absalom kind of gathers an army, and he's actually going to eventually attack David, but David's advisor, Ahithophel, even sides with Absalom, and he has to flee Jerusalem because they are marching towards Jerusalem. Now, during this, we see an interesting story, because while in pursuit in the forest of Ephraim, Absalom, riding, King James Version says a mule. I don't know if it was really a mule, probably more of a horse, I would imagine, but it says he's riding a mule, and he gets his head stuck in this tree, and the mule goes out from underneath him, and he's hanging, and then Joab kills him. Joab is David's general. David had said, be gentle with Absalom. Don't hurt him. Bring him back to me. But Joab killed him. And if you study more about Joab, you find that that's kind of his way. Someone upsets him, he basically kills them. And David does not like that, but he does it repeatedly, killing a lot of different people. But he eventually gets his as well. Spoiler alert. But 1 Kings chapter 1, we have one more rebellion, Adonijah's rebellion. Okay, so this is David's son. Even though Solomon is going to be king, David's other son claims the throne without David's knowledge. David has gotten older in years, and he's kind of gathering support and talking to different people, and he's claiming the throne without David's knowledge. Bathsheba and Nathan, though, they each kind of take turns going into David and kind of planting seeds. Hey, this is happening. I think you said Solomon was going to be king. And then Nathan goes in and says, hey, this is happening. Solomon's supposed to be king, right? And David said, oh, yeah, we got to do something about that. So he basically very publicly appoints Solomon king and does it all the right ways and has everybody there and anoints him. And verse 38 says, then Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, Benaiah son of Joadiah, along with the Cherethites and Pelethites, went down and set Solomon on King David's mule, and they escorted him to Gihon. Zadok the priest took the horn of oil from the tabernacle and anointed Solomon. Then they blew the ram's horn, and all the people proclaimed, long live Solomon. So, Adonijah's little rebellion's over. I believe Joab kills him later, if I remember correctly, because Joab kills a lot of the guys. So that is over. David is older now in years, but he is still spending time preparing the temple. He knows that he's not going to be able to make the temple for God. That is going to be built, but he's not going to do it because his entire kingship has been marred with blood and with destruction and with war. He's going to have his son do that, but he is spending a lot of time gathering materials, preparing for it, thinking about the future. And that's one thing about David. He doesn't complain about these things. He just plans for the future. If that's the situation, he's not going to be the one to build it. He's going to put everything he has into gathering the materials and supporting the future for it being built. Now, David said, Solomon, my son, is young and inexperienced, and the house to be built for the Lord must be exceedingly magnificent, famous and glorious throughout all the countries. I will now make preparation for it. So David made abundant preparations before his death, and you read about the materials and things that he gathered, and it's pretty impressive. And then he's talking to Solomon, and he says, this is what God said to me a while back. He said, behold, a son shall be born to you, who shall be a man of rest, and I will give him rest from all his enemies all around. His name shall be Solomon, for I will give peace and quietness to Israel in his days, which is very opposite from what David had experienced. He shall build a house for my name, and he shall be my son, and I will be his father, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom over Israel forever. And we know that that lineage is supposed to continue on to Christ, so it's important to hear God say that. So Solomon's going to be the one to build the temple, and that lineage is going to continue. So David's last days, he instructs Solomon, kind of funny things to me. He says, walk in the statutes I have, never turn away from God, stick with him, and make sure you execute Joab. It's basically what he says. Because Joab, murdered a lot of people that David did not want him to kill, and he says that to him. And then David passes away. And verse 10 says, then David rested with his fathers and was buried in the city of David. The length of David's reign over Israel was 40 years, 7 years in Hebron and 33 years in Jerusalem. So Solomon is going to take over now. So Solomon sat on the throne of his father David, and his kingdom was firmly established. And Solomon executed Adonijah and Joab. So jumping into Solomon, our last of our three kings, we've heard about Solomon and his tremendous wisdom. So God comes to him and says, what can I do for you? And so one night at Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream, and God said, ask, and I will give it to you. Therefore, give your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, to discern between good and evil, for who is able to govern this great people of yours? So he asks, seemingly with wonderful intentions, for wisdom. And God says, behold, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, that there will never have been another like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you did not request, both riches and honor, so that during all your days, no man in any kingdom will be your equal. So he's going to make Solomon the wisest and the most richest and essentially the most powerful man in all of the world. Nothing could go wrong with that, I'm sure. It's the power and the wealth, as we're going to see, I think, begin to affect him. But Solomon does build the temple, and it's incredible. And it says in the 480th year after the Israelites had come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the Mount of Zib, the 2nd month, he began to build the house of the Lord. The foundation of the house of the Lord was laid in the 4th year of Solomon's reign, in the month of Zib. In the 11th year, in the month of Bul, the 8th month, the temple was finished in every detail and according to every specification. So he built the temple in 7 years. So Solomon spends 7 years and builds this tremendous, magnificent temple. It's incredible supplies that David had spent a lot of time gathering and preparing for him. So Solomon strengthens the land. He moves the ark into the temple. Everyone comes. It's a big deal. He blesses God. He prays for the temple and the people, and he dedicates the temple. And everyone is there, the fathers of all the tribes, the elders of Israel. And then the Lord kind of talks to him and promises the blessings or curses. He basically says to him, you follow me, I'm going to bless you. He says, I promised your father David when I said, you will never fail to have a man on the throne of Israel. He says, if you follow my commandments, that's what I'm going to do for you. But then he says, if you do not, then I will cut off Israel from the land that I have given them, and I will banish from my presence this temple. He even goes as far to say, one day this temple will lie in rubble. People will walk by and they'll look at it and they'll say, man, I wonder what happened here. What horrible thing caused this to occur? So God gives him that warning, and we see that a lot. He's, if you live God's life, he's going to bless you. If you go against him, he's going to curse you. But Solomon's wealth and riches and wisdom grow, and people all over the world hear about it. We know the Queen of Sheba comes and visits, and she sees, and I think the Bible says it took her breath away. Interesting expression. But verse 23 says, so King Solomon surpassed all the kings of the earth in riches and wisdom. The whole world sought an audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom that God had put in his heart. Year after year, each visitor would bring his tribute, articles of silver and gold, clothing, weapons, spices, horses, and mules. So he just continued to get richer and richer, just people wanting to see him and bringing him gifts. Solomon accumulated 1,400 chariots, 12,000 horses, which he chased in the chariot cities and also with him in Jerusalem. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and cedar as abundant as sycamore in the foothills. Talks about 600 giant golden shields and 300 small gold shields and all these other things that he created in that time. But then Solomon gets caught up. It all catches up with him. I think the power, the money, the things that he was entangled in, and he becomes entangled in the world. And he gets caught up with these foreign wives, which God had warned him against. And King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women. These women were from the nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, you must not intermarry with them, for surely they will turn your hearts after their gods. Yet Solomon clung to these women in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth, 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. So Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, unlike his father David. He did not follow the Lord completely. So it finally caught up with him. He got entangled in the world, and God warned them about getting entangled with these women, and he did, and it turned his heart away from God. And God's anger is kindled towards Solomon. He says, and the Lord said to Solomon, because you have done this and have not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded you, I will tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. Nevertheless, for the sake of your father David, I will not do it during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. Yet I will not tear the whole kingdom away from him. I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I had chosen. So he told him, your lineage is going to continue. And he made sure that happened by giving him, as the tribe split, giving him a little piece of it so that would be able to carry out that covenant that was made. But then we're going to see the death of Solomon, verse 41. As for the rest of the acts of Solomon, all that he did as well as his wisdom, are they not written in the books of the acts of Solomon? Thus the time that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel was 40 years. And Solomon rested with his fathers and was buried in the city of his father David, and his son Rehoboam reigned in his place. We don't really know about the end of Solomon's life. I like to think that he went and wrote Ecclesiastes, and that was a reflection, and his heart had changed, and he realized things, and he was warning people and teaching people, and that he turned things back to God, but we don't know absolutely for sure that was the case. It seems like it was, but that's just us guessing, me supposing that. But we're just going to pull a couple things out real quick from these guys, and I've kind of got lessons from each of them up here. From Saul, number one, God's opinion is more important than man's. Saul seemed to struggle with that. He was always worried about the people around him, what they thought about him. He was worried about keeping people happy. He was worried about making sure his captains got what they wanted, and that we know that did not go with God's plan. God's opinion of us and the things that we do is always going to be more important than the people around us. We have to make sure we remember that. We need to have patience with God in the plan that he has for us. Saul did not. Remember, Samuel said, just wait a couple days. I'll come tell you what to do. And he could not do that, and that displeased God. Unlike David, who did have patience. Think about David's situation, anointed to be king at 15, 16, whatever age he was at that point, or younger even, and he didn't take the throne for many, many years. But we never see him complain about that. We never see him say, God, why is this taking so long? He does the best that he can do and follows God's will and helps Saul and does everything right that he can. He had patience. Saul, though, focus on your own relationship with God, not others. He was infatuated with David. Everything that he did, following David, jealousy of David. Think about the time, the resources, the lives that he threw away focusing on David, when he should have been focusing on his own relationship with God, taking care of the people and doing what was right in God's eyes. But he was not. We need to remember that God has already won the battle, as David did. When he went to fight Goliath, he said, this is God against Goliath, not me against Goliath, and he knew that. And we need to remember that as well. Christ has already won the battle. He was resurrected and defeated death and freed us from sin. Now all we have to do is walk that path because he has already won the battle. Have that attitude every day of life and think about that when you wake up in the morning. We also need to be compassionate. When I read the story of David and look into it, I just see this compassion for everybody. Even when Absalom died, he mourned him for days. Even though he done bad things to David, he mourned him. He did not want that fate for him. You know, I think about Mephibosheth and the compassion he had on him and his family. That was David's attitude, compassionate towards others, helping others. We're going to make mistakes. David made some bad ones, but we can't ever stop following God. We don't make mistakes and give up. We don't make mistakes and turn our heart away from God. We make mistakes and then we right them. And we keep going and we fight and we try and we work and we try to do God's will as best as we can. And that's what David did. Unlike the others, he never turned away from God. He just made mistakes along the way. Seek God's counsel. David always did. All the big decisions, everything he did, he was constantly seeking God's counsel. And we need to have that same attitude. Going to God in prayer, thinking about God's word and all the decisions that we make. We can have all the wisdom in the world. We got to make sure we're applying it to our lives. And Solomon, I don't think always did that. And along those same lines, wisdom doesn't equal self-control. It doesn't equal self-discipline. And young people especially, guys, we've got to train ourselves and learn self-control and self-discipline. Really in all things, it'll just strengthen you in the godly things as well. Don't get entangled in the world. The most obvious thing that Solomon did, so caught up in the riches and the other things, he got entangled with these women, and they were his downfall. They turned his heart away from God. And we know that the love of money is the root of all evil, and it was kind of that situation. Getting caught up in the world can harden our hearts towards God, and we can start following down the wrong path. So looking at these three men, we see Saul. He had the physical stature. He was tall and handsome, looked like a true king or general. We had Solomon, who was the smartest guy around, had all the money and power. But both of those guys, it did not help them with God. It did not help them please God and follow in God's will. But David had the heart, and we know he had a heart after God. And that's who we want to model after. We want to have that heart for God. And the Bible tells us in all things, if we don't do it with love, it doesn't matter. If we don't have the right heart, it's not pleasing to God, and it does not matter. Acts 13:22, after removing Saul, he raised up David as their king and testified about him. I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. He will carry out my will in its entirety. Thanks for joining our Sermon Series podcast today. For more, check us out on YouTube or come worship with us on Sunday mornings and Wednesday evenings.